Well, you just watched that fiery speech made by Zainab Soleimani, daughter of General Qasem Soleimani, that was delivered a few hours ago here in the Iranian capital city of Tehran during that special morning ceremony before the leader of the Islamic Revolution led a special prayer over the deceased bodies. And, well, to go on with our discussion, let me invite Jason Unruhe, political commentator, who will join us from Niagara Falls, Ontario. And Jason, regarding the fact that President Trump has just made another threat against Iran, saying that there are 52 targets that have already been designated, and those targets will be hit if Iran retaliates. The U.S. Assassination Act, and that those 52 targets, among them, can be some of the cultural sites that are of the essence to Iranian. He knows at least one thing about Iranians, that they care a lot about culture and heritage. And then we have Human Rights Watch saying that President Donald Trump's public threat to attack Iranian sites of cultural importance would be war crimes if carried out. Foreign Minister Zarif had already mentioned the same thing in the same lines. And then also we have a UNESCO warning and reminding the fact that Iran and the United States of America, they have signed a pact, and that pact requires them not to harm cultural heritage sites. Now, let me ask Jason Unruhe his comments on this renewed threat by President Trump.
Well, there's one thing that pops into my mind right away. You know who also targets cultural sites? Daesh does. In fact, that's been one of their trademarks, is to go into areas, destroy historical artifacts, destroy ancient statues, essentially try to wipe out cultures that don't align with their particular brand of, frankly, insanity. So isn't it ironic, or maybe even wholly appropriate, that Donald Trump threatens to do the very thing it was that Soleimani was fighting against?
Exactly.
So Soleimani was fighting against Daesh. He was fighting against everything that they represented, everything that they do, they believe in, etc., the inhumanities of things. And then Trump threatens to do that very same thing. Wholly ironic, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm. And also there is something else. We have the Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi saying that he had officially invited, he was complaining regarding the fact that President Trump kind of fooled him by asking him to, make an official invitation to General Soleimani to go there on a peace mission and talks with Saudi Arabia. In order to reduce tensions with that country, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And he regretted the fact that this is what happened. And Soleimani was there on a peace mission when he was assassinated.
Well, to be perfectly honest, the idea that the United States lied when using a justification for attacking doesn't surprise me in the very least, and I don't think that it surprises anyone else either, that the United States would so bald-facedly lie. This is almost starting to sound like a setup, as though the U.S. had done this deliberately so that they would know where he is in order to carry out this strike. I mean, this almost reeks of a very cowardly action, if you ask me. So you invite somebody on a peace mission, and then you kill them while they're there. I mean, the amount of diplomatic insanity behind this is just simply off the scale. I mean, what kind of a man offers peace and then kills somebody when they offer it? I mean, this is, it's despicable on so many levels. I think that when you take all of these things together, the U.S. has sent a very clear message. When you kill a guy who was there to promote peace, you are giving a direct and obvious message that you don't want peace. Anybody with some kind of a conscience, any kind of sense of honor would reject a peace negotiation and say that they don't want it, they want a war. But to go and to kill somebody while doing a peace negotiations, it just shows the utter disregard that the United States has for the entire process. And this is the way that a tyrant acts. This is the way that, you know, almost you could almost describe this as a psychotic monster if this were a single individual, but this isn't a single individual. This is Mike Pompeo. This is Donald Trump. And then when you throw on top of this fire the fact that the United States threatened to wipe out cultural sites, I mean, they're making a very specific statement. They're saying something to the Iranian people. We're not just here to overthrow your government. They're saying that they want to completely destroy everything that is Iran. They want to destroy their entire history, their entire culture, their religion, everything. And that's almost a threat of genocide in a manner of speaking. They don't just want to overthrow the government of Iran. They want to erase everything that is Iran. And that's the only reason you would threaten something like that. What Daesh was doing when they were destroying cultural sites was trying to erase that culture from Earth and replace it with their own. There's a lot of words you could use to describe their culture. But essentially, the U.S. is threatening to do that. I mean, the audacity of that. They're saying we're going to wipe out everything it is that you stand for, everything that you've ever been, or anything that you could ever be. I mean, they're almost trying to erase Iranian culture from the history books by doing that. And that's the point of destroying historical and cultural sites, is to erase the past. I mean, we've seen this with various religious wars and all kinds of religions all throughout history, that this has been a thing that they have done, try to erase the past of one of their enemies. And this is wholly in line with what the United States has done previously. Look at what they did with the Native American population. One of the things that they did was they brought the Native children into residential schools. They would beat them, force them to cut their hair, ban them from speaking their languages, ban them from practicing their customs or their religion, force them into a new religion, and try to essentially erase everything that is a Native American culture and history. So the U.S. making this threat is credible because they certainly have done this in the past. So this is something that they do. And I think that very cold-blooded, monstrous threat that's being made against the Iranian people is something that should be taken seriously. And I'm sure Iran is taking it seriously. But I think it's interesting that the U.S. would so blatantly say what it is that they're planning to do.
Yep. Thank you for comments, Jason Unruhe. Now, let me to Niagara Falls to Jason Unruhe. Jason, let's concentrate on the way that European countries and the EU has acted in terms of the response and reaction to this assassination thing.
Well, generally speaking, the European countries have been very have rejected what the U.S. has done. However, just a little while ago, Boris Johnson came out and said that he supported what Donald Trump did, even though the mainstream political establishment inside of the UK acknowledged that this was a very foolish thing to do. So you seem to have that one exception that's Boris Johnson. So while he may support him, and if people know how close Johnson is to Trump, the actual establishment inside of the UK is certainly rejecting of this, and they're not necessarily very happy with it. Now, I've also seen some reports that British ships are being sent near Iran, that one particularly whose name eludes me right now, capable of launching missiles, is now within striking distance of Iran. So it seems like at least Boris Johnson is on the side of Trump in this situation. However, the rest of Europe has certainly rejected this, and many of them who were considered U.S. allies have denounced him for this, showing the utter insanity of what it is that's going on, the recklessness of his actions. Many of them who simply they've wanted a return to the JCPOA agreement, whose whole modus operandi was to return to a more peaceful situation, are now angry with Trump for having taken these actions and basically made negotiations in the future nigh on impossible. You can't ever claim that you're trying to negotiate when you're doing something like this that is so provocative, that is such an insult, that is such a declaration of war. And the European allies who have been trying to get the United States to return to the JCPOA agreement are
but
probably
is it possible under
going a little
such
bit crazy.
situation, Jason? I mean, is it logical? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, making an attack like this on an icon and a hero of the the anti-terrorism war, and then expecting Iran to go to the negotiating table?
Some way they think it makes sense in their minds, but to any rational person, this is the opposite. Maybe they felt that this was going to force Iran to come to the negotiating table. Maybe they felt if they took a threatening enough action that this would make it happen, which is even then wholly ironic, given the fact that Iran had never actually left the negotiating table until these actions had taken place. Iran was still willing to go through with the JCPOA agreement.
Yeah, exactly. And Iran is still saying it is just, scaling back on its commitments within that deal, and that given within the 2-month deadlines that's given stage by stage. It's taken more than a year for now. And what's Europe doing in return? Just asking Iran, just today also, and yesterday we had the French Le Drian asking Iran to stay in the deal. Okay, in return for what?
Apparently not very much. They're just trying to beg for calmer heads to prevail. I mean, that's a lot to ask for in this situation, particularly how threatening that the United States has been. I mean, you don't commit a Pearl Harbor and then turn around and say you want de-escalation. You want negotiations.
Exactly.
The United States actions have been the direct opposite of someone who wanted who wanted negotiations or some kind of a peace agreement. Maybe they thought that this would be enough to intimidate Iran. Who knows? So sometimes the U.S. military tends to believe its own myth, and it tends to believe the myth of its own invincibility, when that's certainly not the case. They can very well lose a war and have lost many wars in the past. But it does seem really odd that this, from a very rational standpoint, none of this makes any sense whatsoever.
Go back to our guests from Niagara Falls, Ontario. We have Jason Unruhe, political commentator. Let's go to Jason and ask him his opinion about, Jason, in terms of responsibility for this. President Trump has issued the order. That's right, we know it. But the analysts I've been talking to in the past couple of days, they have differing opinions on this. Some say that Trump is not solely responsible for this. Some of them blame the Israeli lobby. Some of them also are, as I see here, they're blaming Mike Pompeo for this. So who's to blame?
Well, I think it's largely a collection here. Trump's already admitted that he was the one who gave the order, so his guilt is straight up.
Sure.
Very, very clear. It's been made obvious. There's no doubt in my mind that this idea probably came from Mike Pompeo, and that Mike Pompeo was the one who presented it to him. Pompeo is responsible for this as well. Now, of course, there's an entire chain of command here to carry out this strike. The other generals, the colonels, the other high-ranking officials all knew that this was illegal. So they bear culpability as well in this case. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, who claims that he was the one who told Trump to actually do it, well, he doesn't bear any legal responsibility. He bears a tremendous moral responsibility for having even put this idea in the president's head. I mean, this is not beyond something that Israel would do. Israel has a very, very long history of interfering in the politics of other countries. They have an entire lobby group, AIPAC, dedicated to interfering in U.S. elections, based solely on the idea that Israeli interests should be carried out in the U.S. government. If that's not something coming in influencing your election, then I frankly don't know what is. But of course, Israel bears a huge moral debt for having carried this out. So there's the chain of command. There's Mike Pompeo. There is U.S. President Donald Trump, and to a large degree, in a moral sense, Israel, as in specifically Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jason, what's going to happen to security in this part of the world? What do you think the fate will be, given the circumstances?
Frankly, security is probably going to be a thing of the past that would take an extraordinary amount to actually bring back. We've seen one thing, everybody placing their militaries on alert due to the possibility of a war breaking out. The UK is sending at least one ship towards Iran that carries missiles. This is a provocative act. There have been reports that the Turkish President Erdogan has ordered the Turkish military to begin lining up in order to send more troops into Libya. This is another threat of invasion as a result of this. There's been a great chaos that's been created in the region. The Iranian military is on alert. Military aircraft are patrolling the skies over the country. The U.S. is sending more troops into various Middle East countries. The Iraqi people are carrying out attacks against U.S. targets inside of Iraq. I mean, this has created a great instability. This has created a ton of chaos and danger.
Jason, the Western media, I saw this in CNN and elsewhere, that they had this in quotation, they were awaiting imminent threat from Iran. Now, the basic question is, why should President Trump have done something that should now be awaiting, like the last time he was awaiting for the phone to ring from Iranians, now that he's awaiting an imminent threat from Iran? Was it really worth taking that risk?
Well, it certainly wasn't. If you pick a fight, you're going to get one. I don't know how they could have thought this would turn out any other way, but that's very typical of the media inside the United States. Even though they are wholly in the wrong, they're still trying to twist the narrative as though somehow Iran is still the bad guy, like as if they have no right to retaliate against what it is that the president has done. I noticed something very interesting about even the media in the United States that dissents from him, even those that represent a different interest within the ruling class. A lot of them denounce this as a bad move, but they're more angry about Congress not being consulted, or this not being approved by Congress, and then turning around and while denouncing that, essentially going along with his justification for it. They say the act was wrong, but every reason for doing it is essentially correct, because in the end they're still trying to defend the empire. They are still trying to paint Iran as the villain in this case, regardless of the fact that it's very blatant to the entire world and to everyone else that the U.S. is the aggressor here. They took a completely unnecessary act. They murdered a very important person who was carrying out a very important mission inside of Iraq. And the media, while some of them want to denounce him for not going through Congress, they don't denounce the act for the inhumanity that it is. They don't denounce him for destabilizing efforts to fight Daesh. They're still trying to turn that narrative into a way that they can still essentially blame Iran, without coming right out and doing it. They're still
Right.
repeating the lie that, thousands of American troops have died as a result of Soleimani, which is completely false. A lot of them are now starting to say that the embassy attack on Benghazi all those years ago had something to do with Soleimani. This is a completely ridiculous
Yeah, it's very
accusation
easy to make
that has
such
nothing
claims.
to do with it. So we
Exactly.
still see, even when they're mad at Trump, they still manage to make Iran out to be the bad guy.
Yeah, that's what they've always been doing. Okay, thank you for your comment, Jason Unruhe, political commentator from Niagara Falls. Now, time to go back to our